Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Killing Me Smalls podcast. I am your host, Mike Small, and today we're going to talk some hoops with my guy, Brandon Scoop B. Robinson. Scoop, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. This is your second appearance on the pod, so we
Yes,
can call you friend of the pod now, right?
yeah, you can call me everything except late for dinner.
Well, everybody knows you from Slam Magazine, Basketball Society, MSG, and there's just so much going on. I mean, the season just ended a couple of weeks ago, and it looks like we're going to have another season soon. The Sixers have done so much, bringing in Daryl Morey, bringing in Doc Rivers, and now we got to fix this roster. Now, right before we got together, it was reported by Shams Charania that Russell Westbrook wants out of Houston. And if James Harden left Houston, his three destination choices would be Brooklyn, Miami, and Philadelphia. And the big rumor that we've been hearing here for the last couple of weeks has been Ben Simmons for James Harden. What do you think is going on with Philadelphia, with Houston, and with all of this mess?
Well, you mentioned Slam and Basketball Society. You got to make mention that I'm actually a senior writer at Heavy.com, and my podcast Scoopy Radio is killing it. And as you relate to Philadelphia,
It's such a good podcast.
Thank you, sir.
It really is. I enjoy it.
Thank you, sir. And as it relates to Philadelphia, one of the things that I've made mention of that has been a constant is the fact that Philadelphia, as it relates to Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, it's believed by some. I had Rashad Phillips on the Scoopy Radio podcast, and he basically said that the Toronto Raptors are looking for LaMelo Ball, and so what ends up happening in that regard is there's a belief among some in NBA circles that essentially the Minnesota Timberwolves or the Golden State Warriors could be a facilitator in pick swaps with Philadelphia in a potential 3-team trade. So with that being said, you hear a lot about James Harden. You hear a lot about Ben Simmons at large. There's even a report that I put out back in October that the Houston Rockets are interested, at least in theory, in potentially going after Joel Embiid. So there's a lot to dissect in that regard. I think that this is not a traditional offseason. As you mentioned, it's also not a traditional draft. The draft usually happens in the 25th of June, and then free agency happens a week and a half to 2 weeks later. So a lot of stuff is being compacted into one. The state of Philadelphia is very interesting because if the 3-team trade were to happen, the way it was described on the Scoopy Radio podcast with Rashad Phillips, you could check it out. If the 3-team trade does happen with Toronto, who does want LaMelo Ball from his indication, essentially Kyle Lowry could find his way back home. A Cardinal Doherty High School alum could find his way to Philadelphia, Villanova alum as well. But again, these are things that are being discussed and tossed around. It's the NBA transaction period is always fluid and things do change. But the James Harden and Russell Westbrook dynamic is interesting. About when I was supposed to originally do this interview with you, and while I was waiting for my Uber, I placed a call to someone in the know within Russell Westbrook's core. And I basically say that what I know just with the Rockets at large is just was a lack of accountability. And really and truly, as it was reported by Shams, but also just people weren't happy within the infrastructure of the Rockets. And so, the Knicks are a team that's been tossed around a lot. To me, the Sixers are an intrigue.
For Westbrook?
I mean, that's something that would make sense if the Rockets are serious about Joel Embiid. If the Rockets were serious about Joel Embiid, Russell would have to be tossed in a deal, correct?
I just can't imagine Westbrook and Simmons, two guys that are horrible shooters and two guys that like the ball in their hands playing together.
And that's why I'm saying to you that there's a lot of stuff that's being dissected.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the odds are that, if you were in Vegas right now and you had to place a bet that either Simmons or Embiid gets moved, despite everything that Daryl Morey has been saying and Doc Rivers has been saying about not wanting to move either one of them, what do you think the odds are that one of them get moved?
It's a good thing I don't bet, and I've been to Vegas once. However, in answer to your question, I think Simmons would make more plausible sense,
I agree with that.
as I mentioned earlier. Particularly because I know LaMelo Ball and the Toronto Raptors are very high on LaMelo Ball. And in order for that move to happen, Simmons would likely have to be involved and would actually, potentially get shipped to the Warriors or the Minnesota Timberwolves. To me, that makes more plausible sense.
I can't see the Sixers trading Simmons for Kyle Lowry. I mean, Lowry's what, 30, 31, 32 years old. He's a great player and a great leader and would be great in Philly, but you'd need more than that, right?
Have to be more than that. And I think the thing that's going to stand out is it's potentially going to be, if it happens, as it was stated on my podcast, I would believe that it would have to be more than just 3 teams. You potentially have to have 4 teams.
Wow. Is there enough time for a 4-team deal to be figured out in the next, 10 days?
Here's the thing about free agency. And if you check some of the other things I've reported, like Chris Paul and the myriad of about 8 or 9 teams, Labor Day weekend, I was tweeting about there was interest. But
now you did call this Kyle Lowry thing to Philadelphia a long time ago. You called it on my podcast, actually, back the day Brett Brown got fired.
The Brett Brown thing I knew.
Yeah.
It was imminent. As far as the Kyle Lowry thing, it was said on my podcast by someone that's in the know, that's very tied to the Toronto side of things. And, I talked to certain folks within Philadelphia. They've said that that's not what they're looking to do. But things do change. Mm-hmm. And I think that at the end of the day, if you're looking at Kyle Lowry, who you mentioned is 31 years old, you'd have to imagine that there's some of the pieces. What I will tell you is I think Oklahoma City is an intriguing prospect only because of the 8 or 9 teams that I mentioned, Philadelphia, as it relates to Chris Paul, I think that is something that is intriguing because you essentially would give up maybe Josh Richardson and you can still keep Ben Simmons and you don't have to move and you keep Embiid and Simmons together and you're not depending on Shake Milton to be your starting point guard.
Well, that would be utopia in Philadelphia. But here's my question for you. In order to do that, you've got to get off of Tobias Harris and Al Horford. Mm-hmm. Every day I look on Twitter and somebody's got another Al Horford deal on the NBA trade machine. Does he have any value whatsoever?
I spoke to someone within the Sixers organization back in the winter time. And I told them that they paid too much for Al Horford, and they didn't disagree. They also didn't agree either. But I think when you look at Al Horford and the fact that he was basically in a fill-in piece when they weren't able to get Jimmy Butler,
right?
And they weren't able to re-sign JJ Redick. I think they scrambled, and Tobias Harris was their guy, and they overpaid Al Horford to do so. Now, I know that the Knicks, it's been reported that the Knicks were looking to take on one bad contract.
Right. And the Sixers have 2 really bad ones.
Yeah. So when you look at the Knicks or Sacramento, that does make plausible sense. I know everybody and a lot of people have made mention about the whole Buddy Hield thing.
Yeah.
The Buddy Hield thing, particularly, on social media, right, and trust the process, and just all of the things that go with that. You got to get Sacramento to agree to take that contract. I think the Knicks and Sacramento make the most plausible sense. They just got to agree to it. Just like with the whole Toronto thing. Toronto could like a LaMelo Ball, but ultimately Philly and Golden State have to sign off on it too, because if Philly trades Ben Simmons, like you said, you're getting back you're getting back a piece in Kyle Lowry from the Toronto Raptors, and then that's it. So I think it comes down to, I think Chris Paul is a better fit than Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, I've got to think, I'm going to run this by you, but if I were running the team right now, you've got, if you watched closely Daryl Morey's press conference, and I watched it twice actually because I'm kind of a nerd like that. I'm reading between the lines, and what I'm seeing there is basically they said, look, without saying it, Embiid and Simmons are really good. And some of these pieces that the Sixers have, like Tobias Harris and Al Horford and Josh Richardson, were used properly. And with a better coach, which they have in Doc Rivers, this thing could work. Now, I think they all agree that they need to get a better piece. A Chris Paul would be perfect. Somebody who could run the point, move Simmons off the ball, and let him hopefully grow as a power forward. Tobias Harris is not a small forward. That's one of the problems. But Morey talks about positionless basketball. I just have to think that they've got to try to make it work with those two before they give up on one of them. At least that's what they're thinking. But Moore is the kind of guy that if somebody presents an offer and it makes sense to trade Simmons, he'll do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it comes down to, Daryl Morey is a respected front office guy as the president, but he also has a consultation staff of the general manager, Elton Brand, and some of the other folks that are over there. But I think when it comes down to, if you hold Elton Brand at his word or what he said at the end of the season about keeping Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid together, which I know that the Sixers internally really want.
Yeah.
Then you got to hold Elton at his word.
Well, Elton has no power. I mean, let's be honest. As soon as Daryl came in, Elton is not somebody that yields a lot of power. Would you agree with that?
I'd rather not say because I have a good relationship with Elton. What I'll say,
Seems like a great guy. He just seems to have no power. I mean, they brought somebody in above him. They let him, bring in his whole staff, and then they brought somebody in above him. So, I mean, it was the right move. He said that it was, Daryl Morey said. Go ahead.
I think, me personally, I think Daryl Morey is a smart guy, but I think that a lot of people put a lot of stock into analytics, and I think sometimes with just that level or caliber of people, I think the only bad move that Elton really made was signing Al Horford. But you still got Jimmy Butler. You still found a way to make a trade to get Tobias Harris.
Well, he gave up a lot. I mean, in Philadelphia, the thought is that they gave up too much for Tobias, then maxed him out instead of Butler, and couldn't find a way to keep Butler. And then you see what Butler did in the finals.
Personally, this is just my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that people put too much stock into Daryl Morey, and I think that when you look at what happened in Houston, he didn't step down; he was fired. And I think when you look at the fact that you got rid of Chris Paul, it's easy to criticize Elton as it relates to giving up too much, but you traded away Chris Paul and you didn't look at the value that you actually had with Carmelo Anthony, and you let him go.
A lot of people say that was the owner that made that deal. They wanted Chris Paul out of there and hated the contract so much that they gave up so much. But look, we'll never know behind the scenes, and you know a lot more than I do. Let me ask you. Let me transition to this. What is the perception of Philadelphia as a destination? I mean, I think people know that Simmons and Embiid are really, really talented. It's been reported, by some that they don't get along. It's also been reported that that's a bunch of crap. But what we do know is that they're both young. They're both stubborn. Simmons won't shoot. Embiid won't come in shape. And, what is your perception of Philadelphia as a destination for star players to want to play with these guys?
Being around Philadelphia this past season, around in the locker room with the Sixers and having, relationships outside of the locker room with certain players on that team, my perception of Philadelphia is that Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid can play together if they have the right coach. I think that Brett Brown overstayed. He stayed too long.
He did.
And it was almost like Jeff Fisher with the Tennessee Titans for a lot of years.
That's not a bad analogy, actually.
And I actually like Brett Brown. He's quirky. I think he's a smart basketball mind, but I think the process is still incomplete. And I think that when it's all said and done, that's the reason why Jimmy Butler ended up leaving. And I think because he and Brett didn't get along. And that's the reason why I can tell you that there are players who wanted to come there and they didn't want to sign them, even as free agents. Jamal Crawford wanted to play for the Philadelphia 76ers. And there are some things behind the scenes that went on that I'll keep close to the vest. But
can you share anything? It would be great to hear a story that
I just know that Al Horford pushed very hard to get Jamal in, as did their rookie, Matthias Thybulle.
Yeah.
Thybulle pushed really hard. I know that there were some other folks within that were tied to people within the Sixers, like Jason Terry, who spoke well on Jamal's behalf. There were people who really were pushing for that, and then you look at Cormorants and you're like, Jamal would probably shoot lights out and just be a strong vocal leader. In that,
do you think that was more of a Brett Brown thing, that he didn't feel like he could coach him?
I think Brett protected Elton, and I think Elton protected Brett. I think it was a duality there.
Yeah.
So you never really got an answer as to who said what.
Well, I think it's very, very clear that this team needed a cultural shift, and they've got it. Good, bad, or indifferent. And I do think Doc Rivers is a huge upgrade. I do think Daryl Morey, whatever you feel about analytics, this is trust the process town. Sam Hinkie, we love analytics around here. Mm-hmm. I do think it's going to be interesting, and I do think it's going to be better. If you were running the team with all the things that we just talked about, trading Embiid, trading Simmons, attaching Thybulle and a pick to Horford to get him out, or trying to get off of the Harris contract, finding Buddy Hield, getting Chris Paul. I'm making you king of the Sixers for a night. What do you think is the most realistic thing that they will do and could do?
Well, first, I'll start off by saying I am a graduate of Eastern University on the main line and took night classes at Community College of Philadelphia.
All right, so you're in. You count.
I know the city of Philadelphia as well as the team at large well. If I'm Philly, I'm finding a way to get rid of Al Horford's contract, Josh Richardson, and shipping that to the Oklahoma City Thunder to get Chris Paul. And, I think when you look at the Sixers,
Richardson has some value in Oklahoma City. He's from there. And you know what? He just does not fit on this team whatsoever. He's not as good a shooter as we thought he'd be. He's an okay defender, but he's not as good as I thought he'd be. And he just does not make sense. I would attach him to Horford. I agree with you.
A native of Norman, Oklahoma.
Yep.
I spent time in Oklahoma last summer. I was with Russell Westbrook the day he got traded to the Rockets. He had a comedy show that night. I was with him. But what I'll tell you is I think, I think when you look at what the Sixers did in the playoffs, particularly with moving Shake Milton to point guard and moving Ben Simmons off the ball and moving him to the 4. To be honest with you, it reminded me a lot of the Miami Heat when LeBron was in year one with that team, and how much he kind of moved off the ball alongside Mario Chalmers and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. And, I spoke with Brett about that during the playoff run, and asked him what he thought, if he thought that there was an equal comparison. And he said, I watched LeBron when he was when he was an assistant coach with the Spurs.
Yeah.
And, saw how he moved from the elbow and got to the basket. And, he can see that comparison there. And so I think that
honestly, it would have worked. It would have worked if, one, Simmons stayed healthy. If, two, he shot the ball, because he did shoot the ball his first game back and then stopped doing it. And 3, if Shake had a little more confidence. I think Shake is a great player to come off the bench, create a shot, hit shots, but I don't think he's your playoff point guard.
Chris Paul is an upgrade in that regard. The interesting thing about it is when you look at some of the teams that I mentioned, the Milwaukee Bucks, he'd be beneficial to Giannis. The Knicks, I think it would be a situation similar to the one that he's in Oklahoma, except he'd be playing under Tibbs. When you look at the Sixers, it would make sense. It would be an upgrade to Shake Milton, and the Sixers had a better season the season before this one, and I think that this year would if they were able to pull that off would be a gap year, and would kind of be just interesting.